Hi everyone. In this video we're going to be talking about our last sampling method. And this guy is a little bit different in that, unlike our previous four, this method does not involve any randomness in the selection process. A convenience sample is what it sounds like. So in a convenience sample, the researcher selects members of sample based on ease of access. For example, when I was at Hartnell College, way back in the 90s, we had a final project for this end of the statistics course. And I was comparing GPAs at two different local high schools, meaning I actually had to go talk to students at two different high schools. Because this was more about data analysis than it was about sampling method, I used a convenience sample at both high schools. I went at lunch, I sat by one of the food carts, and just every student that walked up to the food cart, I asked them about their GPA and study habits. I didn't do a random selection. I didn't catch any students who left campus for lunch because they were seniors and they had cars. It was not a representative sample or a random sample in any way. But it served the purposes for me as a statistics student because it was easy for me to collect data that way. So, the pros and cons of convenience sampling. The pros are pretty obvious in that data is easy to collect. And what that means in terms of me as a researcher is less time, my study gets published faster, and less money because research grants are not infinite. So there are upsides to this method, right? I can get data fast and get data with less money and less personal investment on my end. And the issue is, what are the cons? And the big one is my sample is subject to bias. My sample is not representative of the population that I drew it from. So we need to weigh these things as a statistical researcher. When I was doing my study for a final project in a college class, my final project wasn't being used to make any decisions about high school policy. So the pros easily outweighed the cons for me. I wasn't going to use this to make policy. It wasn't going to affect anybody else. I just needed data to run some calculations on. So this was the clear winner. If I am working in public policy and I want to make decisions about how high schools are run, this worries me a lot more. Because if I'm collecting my data in a way that excludes entire sections of the high school population, the policy I enact is going to be unfair, inequitable. So for sampling that is not truly random, I really have to look at what I'm going to be doing with that data. If it is a for fun poll, if it's I just need some numbers for crunching for a class, this is great. If this is a scientific study where I'm trying to make claims about a population, if this is a study that's going to be used to make policy decisions about a population, I should be more concerned about this. And random sampling is the way to go. As students in my stats class, more often than not, you're going to be reading other people's studies and not doing your own. Most of you are not going to be professional statisticians. So when you are reading the studies of others, you really need to look at how they collected that sample. Did they use a sample that had randomness in it? If it did, that eliminates some of that potential bias, because we know every group, every subgroup in the population is equally likely to be selected. Our samples are more likely to be representative. Or was I looking at a convenience sample where the members were just selected based on ease of access to the researcher? There is another way to collect people that wasn't mentioned in any of these videos called a volunteer sample. We get them with volunteer surveys. They also have to tend to have these pros and cons, where volunteers typically are easy to access and require less time and money, but we get a different set of potential biases. With convenience sample, I'm intentionally excluding people that are not present when I'm collecting the data. With volunteer sampling, I'm likely to get extreme opinions, because if all I'm doing is asking customers to respond to a survey, people who had really good and really bad experiences are likely to respond, but diners who had a middle of the road experience are likely to ignore the survey. So if my sampling method was not random, there was no SRS at any point in the process, I really should be looking at the pros and cons of those methods and asking myself, was that sampling method a reasonable choice based on the objectives of the study? All right, if you have any questions on the sampling methods we've covered, feel free to send me an email. Otherwise, I will see you in our next video.